the vast majority of people feel better when they're getting this morning and evening sunlight exposure. And this is especially important in kids. All right, this is one of the things that, this paper points out, and there are good data, that people are spending approximately 90% of their time indoors nowadays. Daytime time indoors. And those indoor environments are simply not bright enough. You think, oh, there's all these bright lights, and some people are putting blue blockers on in the middle of the day, which is the worst thing you could possibly do. If you're going to wear blue blockers, and I don't think they're necessary, but if you're going to wear them, you'd want to wear them at night. And in the evening, you don't need to wear blue blockers. You just simply should dim the lights, and ideally have lights that are set a little bit lower in your environment, which the Scandinavians have been doing for a long time. So, kill the overhead lights. And don't obsess about bright light exposure in the middle of the night. In fact, for a long time, I and some other people were saying, even just a brief flash of light in the middle of the night can quash your melatonin. That's true. But the other time in which you're in this quote unquote circadian dead zone is in the middle of the night. You can't shift your circadian clock in the middle of the night. But, all of this gets down to interweaving rhythms of light sensitivity, temperature, hormone output, cortisol. There's a whole landscape of circadian biology. This paper, which was published in a new journal I'm really excited about, called Nature Mental Health. This journal was just launched recently, is entitled Day and Night Light Exposure Are Associated with Psychiatric Disorders, and Objective Light Study in more than 85,000 people. Now, I have to say that I think the title of this paper is terrible. Sorry, folks at Nature Mental Health, because if one just read the title, it sounds like day and night light exposure are associated with psychiatric disorders, right? If this were a newspaper headline, you'd be like, oh my goodness, well, what are you supposed to do, right? But that's not the conclusion. The conclusion is that getting a lot of sunlight exposure during the day and getting a lot of dark exposure at night is immensely beneficial for psychiatric health, and in a number of ways. Participants basically nailed home the idea that the more time you spend outdoors, the better is your mood, the better is your sleep, the better is the rhythmicity of your sleep-wake cycles, and on and on. Something that I think, even though people will say we've known that for thousands of years, needed scientific substantiation. This new study essentially looked at the relative contributions of daytime light exposure and nighttime dark exposure, and they did that on a background of it looking in particular at people who had major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder. Here's the basic takeaway, and I'll quote them here, and then I'll tell you my interpretation. Here I'm quoting: avoiding night at light and seeking light during the day, I love that word, seeking, may be a simple and effective non-pharmacologic means for broadly improving mental health. So that's a pretty bold statement, right? And I love that they say seeking, because it implies that people aren't reflexively getting the light exposure that they need, that it needs to be a practice, much like zone 2 cardio or resistance training. They also had a nighttime light exposure evaluation, and they had people who were in the low Q1 and Q2, so these people are getting less nighttime light, versus Q3, Q4, more nighttime light. Nicely, they also looked at sleep duration, and they looked at photo period, meaning how long the days were for those individuals, how active they were. 10 hours a day, 14 hours a day, because the more active you are, the more opportunity for light exposure you have during the day.